If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
Absolutely. And let's talk about, this time last year compared to where they come into this season. So this time last year, you're talking about having to unload half the roster, essentially. So many guys just being kind of unplayable for the Knicks moving forward. Kemba Walker, Nerlens Noel, Alec Burks was unplayable, but he was the guy that had to get out of here. Knicks in a different spot coming into this offseason. One, you have not nearly as many guys, coming up on free agent deals, things like that. And number two, you have a lot of good players, guys, that I think you want to kind of build around or perhaps turn into maybe bigger players, bigger stars. So let's start with the Josh Hart situation. Any chance Josh Hart leaves in your eyes? You think that it's almost a lock that he stays with the Knicks? He can opt out of that $12 million he has left on his deal. The rumors and the word is that the expectation is that he will sign a deal maybe around that ballpark, maybe a little north of that, 3 or 4 years with the Knicks. Do you expect to see that?
I expect to, but that's a big difference between the question, is there any chance that he leaves? Yeah. Anytime you're talking about free agency, just for the details here, Josh Hart has $12.9 million coming his way in 23-24. That's next season. So that's a player option, which means he has until next month to opt out of that contract. And at that point, he becomes an unrestricted free agent. And anytime you talk about unrestricted free agency, all bets are off. Do I think he plans on returning to the Knicks? Yes. Do I think the Knicks plan on re-signing him and bringing him back into the fold? Yes, absolutely. But we've seen a million times in a million different sports and a million different spots where the player and the team are aligned going into free agency, and then the player becomes a free agent and the agent gets a call and Team X is offering $18 million a year over 4 years. They're the final piece to make a championship run. And listen, Brunson, I love you. Tibbs, you're a good dude. Leon Rose, I love you, but listen, I just had twins. The guy's a father, and he's got to do what's best for him and his family. Do I think he'll give the Knicks an opportunity to match any contract he receives? Yes. Do I think the Knicks would match any reasonable contract? Yes, but there is that outlier. There is the possibility that contract exceeds. There was talk the end of last month that he'd be looking in the $18 to $20 million range, which seems like a very high number. But giving as well as he played over that second half of the regular season, when he was arguably the most impactful, trade addition for any team in the sport, those numbers didn't seem as crazy. The one silver lining, and we'll talk about this with Emmanuel Quickley as well, it's something we've discussed on the pod, for him struggling in that Miami series when his kind of liabilities are exposed. Maybe one of the reasons another team didn't want to trade a first-round pick to Portland was because he was hesitant to shoot the three-pointer during the first half of the season with the Blazers and didn't shoot at a particularly good clip. Came to the Knicks, was Steph Curry for 2 months, basically didn't miss a three-pointer. And then in the postseason, teams dared him to shoot. And outside of those couple three-pointers in the corner in game 2, really struggled with his outside shot, which limited his effectiveness because, he's great at creating, semi-fast break transition, finishing in the lane, etc. But when the teams really give you 5 to 10 feet, you're not able to kind of take advantage of that runway. You can kind of see why his game is somewhat limited due to his inconsistent three-point shooting. That's multiplied when you play with a kind of shoot-first point guard, a non-traditional point guard like Jalen Brunson, who really needs the center of the floor open to operate. We saw when he was on the floor with Hart as opposed to with Grimes, the numbers are exponentially different in terms of his effective field goal percentage, shot attempts in the paint. Brunson, I'm speaking of. So ideally, you want to have shooters and spacers on the floor with Brunson. All that said, Hart proved his value. Probably best suited to be a sixth man. The question then becomes, and we'll talk about this for the next few weeks and few months, what's the right price? Is it, again, he'll make at least $13 million in the offseason, so it makes no sense for him not to opt out of the contract. Should he, again, worst case scenario, he can re-sign for 1 year and $13 million, and then, so he doesn't lose anything. Teams are going to offer him at least at least 3 years at, I would say, at a minimum of 12, 13 million a year. So you're looking at 40 million guaranteed as opposed to 13. Question is, does some other team get involved and force the Knicks to up the ante 15, $60 million annually times 3 times 4? That's when things get tricky, complicated, and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting because this is a weird offseason where you don't have a bunch of teams with a ton of cap space.
Right.
I think going into this offseason, really only the Rockets and Pacers have, and the Spurs have considerable cap space. A lot of teams can create cap space through not pick up options and things of that nature. But you're not going to have a bunch of teams with, $50 million laying around. So if you have a team that's going to make, one big signing or 2 big signings, is Josh Hart going to be the guy, and our team's going to be willing to outbid the Knicks to make sure they get Josh Hart? You think that would take probably one of these teams that are closer to competing for a championship to do that, and all those teams seem to be capped out. So I would be surprised if Josh Hart was gone.
That's a good point, because the teams that have the cap space to kind of outbid the Knicks, they are not one piece away. And Josh Hart at age 28 is like a one piece away guy.
Yeah, I mean, are the Rockets, giving Josh Hart $20 million? Are the Magic giving? I'm looking at teams with the highest projected practical cap space. The Spurs, Jazz. I mean, these are teams that I can't see them, because I think the number is going to be something between $15 and $16 million that I think he probably caps out at the most he would probably get. Do I think he's going to get that for any of those teams? That would surprise me. So I think that he'll be here. I think he knows that this is his best spot for him. Josh Hart in that series against the Miami Heat shot, I believe, 23% from the 3-point line, which was nothing like how he shot in the regular season for the Knicks. He shot almost 50%, or more than over 50% from 3. So I do think that may hurt his value a little bit. This idea that he's a floor spacer really kind of got exposed a little bit against Miami. So that'll bring his price down. I think when it comes to these guys with the extensions, Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, that becomes this very interesting conversation. Because for Emmanuel Quickley, again, how much does the playoffs come into effect? I mean, he was stellar for the entire regular season. But how much does that poor postseason come into effect? And what does Emmanuel Quickley see himself as? Because if you're talking about Emmanuel Quickley as a backup guard, to me, like, the max value for that kind of player, you've seen, it's kind of the contract Derrick Rose is about to get bounced from. The 3 years of $43 million. He's an older player, but even the deals that Clarkson has gotten, the deal Tyus Jones got, he's the highest paid backup point guard. He's making about $14 million a year. I mean, is Emmanuel Quickley? You would think he's going to maybe reset the market. But how much further is he going beyond maybe what Tyus Jones got from the Memphis Grizzlies? I think that would be one of the interesting things to follow.
Really good. I think that Tyus Jones comparison is really good. Who's a player that may not have as high a ceiling as IQ, but his floor is really high, consistent, always near the top of the league in terms of assist to turnover ratio. But the thing that IQ has on his side is youth. Jordan Poole signed a 4-year, $128 million contract. IQ could easily say, listen, I'm a better player. I'm a more valuable player than Jordan Poole. And he is, especially when you consider what he brings to both sides of the floor. But again, that's the outlier. I'm sure the Warriors regret that decision.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would sign Poole to that this time around.
Totally agree. Yeah. So, whereas Hart is like, I think we feel comfortable saying his floor is probably like 13, 14. His ceiling's probably like 16, 17, probably land somewhere in that. I think IQ, you can go in the other direction. I'm sure some GM thinks, listen, undersized 2 guard, point guard, he did, we saw he's been inconsistent, from time to time. We saw if he doesn't, if his shot isn't falling, he's a tough time contributing offensively. We saw it in the postseason. So maybe he's only worth 10 to 12 million a year. On the other side of the coin, you look at the bigger picture, you look at his full body of work, particularly the postseason. When IQ was the 3rd best player on the Knicks night in, night out, especially
regular season,
the regular season. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When you factor in his contributions again on both sides of the floor, highest plus minus on the team by significant margin. Knicks are a better team with Emmanuel Quickley on the floor. I think they understand that they need to keep him. I think he knows that they know that they really want to keep him. So it'll be very interesting. And again, he's only extension eligible, which means the Knicks can also kick the can down the road.
That's true.
the fear there is that he becomes a restricted free agent, and then you get into the DeAndre Ayton scenario, which, listen, IQ is not on near the level in terms of impact and desirability throughout the league that Ayton was, the former #1 overall pick. And even in that scenario, the Knicks have the right to match any offer, so they still wouldn't lose him. So he's 2 years away from being an unrestricted free agent. That being said, there is it certainly could be argued that it is beneficial for both the player and the team to avoid distractions and have the player locked in and possibly lock him in at a discount. My opinion, it would make a lot of sense for the Knicks to try to lock him up now, especially if they can get him at a little bit of a discount coming off that poor postseason. But those are the things that Leon Rose is going to have to weigh. I think it all comes down to what IQ is willing to settle for, because I think the Knicks will go up to 15 plus a year. But if he's looking, no, I want 80 million over 4 years, I want 90 million over 4 years, that's when Rose and company might say, listen, that's a little bit too rich for us. Come back another season. We love you, but then we'll reassess next summer.
Yeah, the Quickley thing, I think maybe it's just, maybe I'm just being kind of like an alarmist or not. Maybe I'm being, too defeatist in terms of how this is going to work out. But this is a part of me that kind of wonders if this thing may be a lot more of a contentious negotiation than I think a lot of folks realize. Because he kind of reminds me a little bit in like the Terry Rozier kind of lane where Rozier was before he signed the deal with Charlotte, where he was kind of stuck as a backup who could clearly start. And when he started, he played really well. And like those guys, they like we saw with Jalen Brunson. And I mean, like if you have a point guard, like that can take you a long way. And if you got a guy who right now is locked into a backup role, I mean, he's never going to be a starter with the Knicks as long as Jalen Brunson's here. If Emmanuel Quickley sees himself as a starter in the NBA, what is his incentive to sign an extension other than security, obviously? What is the incentive to sign an extension for backup money? We can say, well, let me just play this season out and then see what I get on the restricted free agent market. Maybe one of these teams that is desperate for a point guard decide, hey, we're going to just like this Charlotte Hornets was, we're going to throw as much money as we can at somebody. Like, I don't know if you remember, Terry Rozier actually talked about that offseason. He thought he was going to the Knicks. And it was Charlotte, like similar to the Josh Hart situation you were kind of alluding to, that could happen. Charlotte came out of nowhere and said, hey, here's this big bag of money, dude, to be our starting point guard. He's all right. I guess I'm going to Charlotte. So that is a scenario quickly that I think will be interesting. We know a lot about how much he values playing in New York, playing at the Garden, playing for the Knicks. I think it matters to him, but I also thinking of Quickley, like, he's one of the few Knicks players that have actually had a lot of profiles written about them over the last few years. Knicks have that kind of tough media, policy. He's a very driven guy. I mean, he writes down his goals. He has big visions for himself. He's obviously a workout warrior by all accounts. He's a guy who's a gym rat. I'm not as certain that he'll be willing to just say, I'll take, solid backup money, even if it does reset the market to be a Knick, if I can maybe become a starter somewhere else. I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to follow for the next summer and maybe even 2 summers.
I mean, you make a good point there. He doesn't have to look very far. The guy right in front of him was a backup for however long.
Exactly.
And got offered the 4-year, $55 million, and said, "Nah, I'm gonna roll the dice." And then Doncic got hurt, so he started 25 plus 30 games. Once he got into the starting lineup for the Mavericks, never came out, and tripled his, doubled his value. Went from 55 million to 100 plus million from the Knicks, and now after starting for a year, could get max money from a team if you want to hit the free agent market. So you're right. A lot of very interesting will depend on what he feels, on what his team feels, what he values security. Maybe they do a shorter extension. Maybe instead of the 4 years he could sign, he signs for 2, locks him up, and then, tacked on to the final 3 years. So he becomes a free agent, after that 8 years of experience, and, then he can sign a bigger contract. Or maybe the Knicks are willing to say, listen, we value him. I understand that it's starter money, but the cap's rising. We think, he's worth 18 to, he's worth $20 million a year. So, there's an argument to be made there, in terms of this team and this value. You don't want to run Brunson to the ground. I'm sure Leon Rose is going to talk to Tibbs about reducing his minutes. Next season we'll see if Tibbs listens, but I'm sure that'll be a focal point. Having a guy like IQ that can start at the point guard, that can come off the bench, that can start at the 2 guard, that can play in 3 guard rotations is incredibly valuable. And the Knicks say, hey, we 90 for 4. We're putting it on the table. If you think you're worth 120 million, that we can't do, but we want to show you we're committed to keeping you here. And maybe the Knicks trade for another big star and they have to lock in that money, to keep him around. So there's a lot of different ways you can go. You're right, but I think that's kind of the most interesting scenario to play itself out because they're different. It will see which side incentivizes security versus risk and all that other cool stuff.
Yeah, if we're saying that IQ is the 3rd best player on the team, well, the guy who's the 3rd highest paid player, RJ Barrett, he's making 23 next year, 25, 27, 29 million. I mean, I don't want to be. I'm not trying to run Quickley out of town for sure, but I'm just being realistic about what may come with this negotiation. And lastly, quickly, just on Fournier and Rose. I mean, there's no chance those guys, I guess, are back in your eyes.
Rose, they will not renew. Obviously, not worth $15+ million a year. That's a team option, so they will decline that team option. I could see Rose coming back in the Udonis Haslem role if he so chooses. Obviously, him and Tibbs are close. He's developed a relationship with the front office and the players in the team. So would he want to come back and just kind of be like a mentor, all that other stuff? Rose is an amazing. Here's a story if you ever hear him talk and kind of discuss what he's come from. Sleeping in a room with, 8, in a 1-bedroom apartment with 8 brothers and sisters. And, a lot of his family's been in jail, in and out of the prison system. And so to see where he comes, he's an inspiring player in person. Fournier, I am not, I understand he wants to get traded. The Knicks want to trade him. The Knicks want to do right by him, et cetera. That doesn't mean that he will be traded this offseason. I could see a scenario in which they can't move him, or then they're unwilling to attach draft capital to move him. So they keep him on the roster, whether he shows up and doesn't come to training camp.
Yeah.
He
might end up being a Jay Crowder situation.
That could definitely be a scenario where he's just not with the team, but still on the roster. And then they try to package that salary in a deal at the trade deadline and or waive him after the deadline, and he's free to sign with whoever he wants. But just because he doesn't have a place on the roster, and again, from the Knicks standpoint, they have invested this much money. They want to do right by the player, but they also listen. If RJ sprains his ankle and Grimes is hurt, they need somebody. And he's one of the only players in franchise history to make more than 200 3-pointers in a season. The guy can obviously still shoot. So there is some value there. It's not like they could. It's not like the NFL where they could waive him and only 3% of his cap hit. So they're not just going to waive him and eat that salary. So for those reasons, I wouldn't be shocked if I saw him return. I think it's obviously unlikely, but it can happen.
Yeah, I thought that. I didn't really love. I know some people kind of were giving him. I didn't really love these comments, to be honest. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter. He doesn't want to be here, but like, I mean, the team just lost, and he's talking about himself. Like, I don't know. I thought he should have just said nothing. Maybe talk a day later or 2 days later, or he could have did an interview with somebody. It seemed very calculated that he wanted to get out there that, hey, I'm going to be traded, and kind of force the Knicks' hand in a way to maybe say, hey, if it's hard to trade me, you're going to have to get rid of me because I'm already telling the media that I'm not going to be here.
I'll give him a pass because he was quiet during the season. He couldn't.
That is true.
He's a guy making $18 million a year. He obviously sees himself as a starting shooting guard in the NBA. True. He's one of the best players in Europe. I'm sure he's thinking, listen, let me go. I can start for Real Madrid, or he was excellent. Leading them to gold medals. Like he's an incredibly respected international player. He doesn't want to be sitting behind Miles McBride and guys that he feels he's better than. Even though I don't disagree with the decision to sit him, but he's a prideful player. And so I appreciate. I think he gets credit for being quiet as long as he did. I think he was waiting to say, listen, I don't view. They may see me as a bum. I'm not a bum.
That is fair. I think that is fair because yes, he could have caused problems during this season and he did not. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.